Sactown Sports, taking you up to 2 p.m. as we got the Rod Wave playing. Mark Jones had a great call. He's on call him Rod because he's on a wave right now, and that was kind of an inside joke because a lot of people know or maybe don't know that Rod Wave is Keegan's favorite artist. So that was nicely done by Mark Jones, and this was nicely done by Brendan Nunez. And I got to tell you, I was just sitting here reading my guy's article, and Brendan, what he did was he did a Q&A with the Sacramento Kings fans that follow him on social media, and then he turned it into an article. You can check that out on SactownSports.com. It is called Kings Post-Deadline Q&A, Sacramento Starting Lineup, Future Outlook. Now, as we talk about Kevin Durant and what type of movement and the future of the Kings, I'm scrolling through and, seeing we'll get to the buyout stuff and things like that. And all of a sudden, I see a question from Tim Frost to Brendan Nunez, and Tim says this: what contract would you currently offer Murray? Prior to the season, I think there was no discussion that he would get a max extension. But with his development within the last two seasons, obviously his offensive development didn't go as planned, and he's kind of been a disappointment. What's your idea? This is Brendan's answer. This feels like one of the more under-discussed storylines of the Sacramento's 2024-2025 season. Playing in his third NBA season, Keegan Murray is eligible for an extension this offseason, but the forward's production taking a step back makes it difficult to gauge. In 50 games this year, Murray averages 12.1 points, 7 rebounds, and 1.4 steals on 43% from the field and 32% from three on 5.6 attempts per game. His three-point percentage had gone down each year after breaking the rookie record for made threes in 2023 when he knocked down 41.1% of his attempts from deep. Now, this is where it gets interesting. He's certainly not in line for max money like deals Cade Cunningham, Scotty Barnes, Evan Mobley, and Franz Wagner received last offseason. New Orleans' Trey Murphy inked a 4-year, $112 million deal, which comes out to $28 million a year, which may be more in line for Murray, but the Kings could even hesitate to give their 4th overall pick a deal in that range. This is from Brendan Nunez. This is coming up next. Here we go. The likely scenario seems to be that both sides will fail to agree to an extension this offseason, leaving Murray heading into restricted free agency the following offseason. Sacramento still holds all the cards in that scenario, while the forward would have the chance to prove he deserves a more significant deal. His defensive impact and rebounding efforts are undeniable, but offensive production is where the big bucks are at. Sharing a floor with Levine, DeMar DeRozan, and Malik Monk makes it tough for him to get a high volume of attempts, but we'll see how the rest of the season plays out. So I just read that, and I thought, and I had no clue we were heading in this direction. Now, once Brendan lays it out, it makes sense, and that's not to say that Keegan Murray is not going to be a Sacramento King after next season, but it does say that there's a possibility the Kings, very similar, and if you're thinking of a similar situation, that dude in the Bay, Jonathan Kuminga, same idea. Other guy from that draft, Moses Moody, signed a smaller extension, okay? Jonathan Kuminga, who's kind of been more of a, I don't want to say prima donna, but been more outspoken about where he fits on that team. Jonathan Kuminga and the Warriors couldn't come to a decision, and Jonathan Kuminga is heading into free agency this upcoming season. Now, he's been injured. It might turn out that the Warriors played this correctly because off the top of my head, I can't remember the extension talks, but I don't think Jonathan Kuminga is going to make more money from free agency. I don't think anyone's going to say, no, we want to pay him more than what the Warriors were initially ready to pay him. So
he was looking for 4 years, 120, and the Warriors weren't offering 4 years, 120.
So now, as we go into this conversation, and again, Brendan's in the Sac chat right now. This is his assumption. This is not sourced, But now we're having the same conversation about Keegan Murray. So Keegan Murray would essentially go into a prove-it year if the Kings do not decide to even get to the 120 mark where where Trey Murphy got to. And we talked about Trey Murphy, and honestly, I think I've seen more from Trey Murphy, at least offensively, than Keegan Murray this season.
Oh, for sure. And again, we talked about Trey Murphy is basically the number 2 option on the Pelicans for most of the season, and they are dead last in the Western Conference. So like he might just be putting up numbers on a bad team.
Sure.
But you're seeing his offensive bag on display. And before this season, he already got his 4 years, 112.
So yes, and that was going into the season. So now it feels like if you are the Pelicans, now the Pelicans, a lot of people say the Pelicans are cursed unless they play the Kings. If you are the Pelicans, you may have gotten a steal, because that's 4 years for $28 million. Trey Murphy, if he continues on this trajectory, you might be getting a lot more than $28 million a year production from him.
I don't know if you remember this, but like 3 weeks ago, you had a question about Keegan versus Trey Murphy. And we talked about how Murphy's numbers are up, but his field goal percent, his attempts per game are way up. And so that's contributing to part of it. When they drafted Trey Murphy in 2021, it was to be Brandon Ingram's backup. And essentially what they saw was enough from Trey Murphy to move on from Brandon Ingram and slot Trey Murphy in at $28 million, whereas Brandon Ingram was at $36 million.
It was close enough.
Yeah.
So now you have a Keegan Murray where it'll come to, so the Kings are going to offer him something. I'm assuming it's more about, will Keegan and his camp feel like let's say they don't get to 112, right? Let's say they say, you know what, Keegan, Trey Murphy is getting $28 million a year. Honestly, we're looking at $25 million a year for you, something like that. And Keegan says, I think, and his camp say, well, we think we're worth more than that. So we're gonna head into restricted free agency and see what happens.
So here's my 2 cents on this conversation. And disclosure, Keegan's my favorite player, so I've thought about this quite a bit. Keegan Murray is probably going to get a contract offer somewhere between $20 million and $25 million, right? If you look at the people who just signed contracts the last couple of years, Jaden McDaniels got $26 million a year from the Timberwolves on a 5-year contract. We mentioned Trey Murphy. He got $28 million a year from the Pelicans. Keegan's probably not going to get that, although his representation will probably say we should be worth Jaden McDaniels money or Trey Murphy money, something like that. Another reference point here, Jalen Johnson for the Hawks. He got a 5-year, $150 million rookie scale extension. So you're looking at $30 million a year for Jalen Johnson, $28 million a year for Trey Murphy, $26 a year for Jaden McDaniels. Based on that market, I would guess Keegan's going to get an offer somewhere between 20 and 25 million. And my hope is that price gap of $4 to $5 million a year is close enough that the Sacramento Kings and Keegan will be able to bridge that before the offseason is done. Maybe they go into next season without a deal done, but I would imagine that the gap is not that large, that they should probably be able to negotiate some sort of extension for Keegan that will probably one way or another end up in 9 figures. Whether it's a 4-year deal or a 5-year deal, he'll get over at least $100 million on that contract.
So for reference, a lot of people where you would put, so Jaden McDaniels is only 24 years old. And I think there are some people that would have Jaden McDaniels over Keegan Murray. I think based on when Keegan Murray started, initially everybody would assume that Keegan Murray would have flown past Jaden McDaniels by now. Jaden McDaniels, he just signed his extension, but what you're talking about, that's 5 years, $131 million, 23 mil this year, 24 mil next year, 26 mil the year after that, then 28 mil when he's 27, and then 30 mil when he's 28. And I can't see Keegan getting that. So if he's not going to get, because that's even more than Trey Murphy. So if he is not going to get a contract. Trey Murphy is on a better deal if you're the Pelicans than Jaden McDaniels.
Well, it's sort of. It's less average annual value, but it's more total value.
Right. My point is, I don't know where Keegan's value is right now, and two, what the Kings think they should do with him. If this is a dude who, coming off of a down year, you decided whether you think Lauri Markkanen, and we don't know if it was only Keegan, maybe it was a bunch of other stuff and Keegan. If you were willing to make Keegan untouchable, right? You're willing to make Keegan, if you're the Kings, you made Keegan untouchable for Lauri Markkanen. You go into the season and a guy that you made untouchable, so you think he should perform at a certain level, now all of a sudden, he needs help. He's doing too much defensively. They tried to set him up to take that huge third-year leap, and he didn't take it. Is that his fault? No. But now it comes down to you have to evaluate what you think Keegan is worth. And I don't think it doesn't matter if it's a longer deal or a shorter deal. I don't think Keegan right now is worth the Jaden McDaniels deal or the Trey Murphy deal. So do you take a chance? And what does Keegan think? If they say, Keegan, we got you slotted at $25 million a year, right? And whatever that is, 4 years, $100 million, something like that. Keegan, that's what we have you slotted at. It's a little bit less than Trey Murphy. It's not as long as Jaden McDaniels. That's where we have you at. Is Keegan Murray going to sit there and say, actually, we're gonna see what we're gonna do? Because again, you're then going into the season, and this is what some people are saying on the text line in the Sac chat. You're going into a season when you are the fourth, fifth option. So when in the hell is Keegan gonna prove in that year that he's worth more money? Unless somebody just decides that he's going to be worth that money when they go to his team. Keegan hasn't proved he can be a viable second option, right? Or maybe third option. So you're gonna pay Keegan $25+ million to maybe be a third option. Another team's gonna do that? I don't think so. I think this might end up being a non-story because Keegan, his camp has no leverage.
Well, the restricted free agency makes it tough for him. And when we come back from the break, I will give you the names of the second tier of players, and we'll see how those compare to Keegan.
All right. Let's continue the conversation. Would you be upset if the Kings moved on from Keegan Murray? What are you willing to pay him? 916-339-1140. Allen Stiles, Sactown Sports. 916 says, so they seem to get rid of every player I start to enjoy watching as a homegrown. That's the 916 talking about Keegan Murray. As Brendan Nunez, if you are driving around and listening in the car, obviously you can't talk to Brendan, but if you are going to be headed home soon, Brendan is in the Sac chat answering any of your questions. Brendan did a Q&A and created an article out of it on SactownSports.com. And one of the questions was Keegan Murray. And once Brendan mentioned that we could have a Kuminga type situation with Keegan Murray, that piqued my interest because that's happening this summer, right? And some people are bringing up how close he was with De'Aaron Fox. I don't think if he goes to San Antonio now, there might just be a group of Sacramentans that just go and cause a lot of problems in San Antonio. I don't think, or just become Spurs fans. I don't foresee that happening. What I think is going to happen, and this is what we're going to get to next as we've scared everyone a little bit, but what I do see happening and why you shouldn't be as scared as we all were in the first segment is because, Kyle, you have a second tier that we think Keegan will be okay with. So
there's really three tiers, I think we should say, because Brennan mentioned it in his story. The first tier is the max contract guys.
Right.
Which
we're not. Yeah, Franz Wagner, we know.
Franz Wagner, yes. Evan Mobley, Scotty Barnes, they all got max extensions. Mm-hmm. The second tier, I think, is the guys we were just talking about, your Jalen Johnsons, Jaden McDaniels, and Trey Murphys.
Right.
Here's the third tier of guys. And I'm just gonna go in order here.
Okay.
And these are only people from the 2020 and 2021 draft classes.
Okay.
So of these people, tell me if you think they are better, worse, or equal to Keegan Murray. So we'll start with Corey Kispert.
Keegan's better than Corey Kispert.
Denny Advia.
I love Denny. I think it's actually pretty close, to be completely honest with you. But I also, not to get off topic, but when we watched that Blazers game, he didn't even close with them. I don't really know what Denny's role is there. So do I think it's close? Yes. Do I think Denny will have that type of leverage? No. So I guess I'll give Keegan the upper hand in that regard.
All right. Now I'm scared of this one. Obi Toppin.
Keegan is better than Obi Toppin.
Okay, and then the last one, Patrick Williams.
Keegan is better than Patrick Williams.
Okay, so let me give you what each of these players signed for on their contracts. Corey Kispert signed for $13.5 million per year.
Yeah, he's getting more than that.
Denny Advia signed for $15 million per year.
These are their extensions.
Yes.
Okay.
Denny Advia signed for $15 million a year. Obi Toppin signed for $15.7 million per year. And Patrick Williams signed for $18 million a year. So Keegan will get more than all of them. And they also signed their contracts 1 or 2 years ago. So Keegan will get more than all of those people. And if Patrick Williams was at $18 million a year, Keegan's going to get, like I said before, somewhere between $20 and $25 million. If we're saying that he's not quite Jalen Johnson, because Jalen Johnson's a number 2 scoring option, he's not quite a number 2 like Trey Murphy is right now on the Pelicans.
What did Jalen Johnson get his yet or no?
Yeah, Jalen Johnson got 5 years, $150.
Oh.
So $30 million a year. Jalen Johnson was 30, Jaden McDaniels was 26, Trey Murphy was 28.
And that's what's funny, because the Hawks came out and said, the Hawks, for as much of a mess they are, the one thing they stayed true with is Jalen Johnson is our one untouchable, and they paid him like that. What confuses me, whether it's Kuminga or whether it's Keegan Murray, is calling these dudes untouchable and then not paying them like that.
So this is the thing that's interesting about Keegan. As of right now, Keegan's value is better than $18 million, no question. So he's going to get more than that, but we don't think he's quite at 26 to 30.
No.
So he's in that 20 to 25 range.
Which is a big range. I like that.
Yes, and I think it's just enough of a range that they can bridge that gap, the Sacramento Kings and Keegan's camp. Now, if you're Keegan's camp, you could look at it and say, when we sign this extension, it'll go into effect in 2026. DeMar DeRozan's probably not going to be on the Kings by that point. Zach LaVine has an opt-out. Keon Ellis can be a free agent that season. So you're looking at a Sabonis, Monk, Keegan core once 2026 comes around, and maybe you're hoping that by then Keegan can make that leap to be their Jalen Johnson or their Trey Murphy. I don't know if that's the strategy they'll take, or if they'll take the 4 years, $100 million if it's offered on the table.
So you're saying what you just said is that is if
Keegan's
they decide they turn it down. They say, we think we're going to be worth more than that in restricted free agency because you're going to lose DeMar and you might lose Zach LaVine.
Yes. And you're going to pay us like a Jalen Johnson or a Trey Murphy at that time. I don't know if they'll take that strategy, but it's a strategy they could go with. So I think if we agree he's better than all those players we mentioned before, and he's not quite at Jalen Johnson or Jaden McDaniels, you're looking at somewhere between 20 and 25 million a year right now for Keegan Murray's extension this offseason, which they might be able to negotiate with the Kings up to just get us to 100. Because again, 20 to 25 million is the same as 5 years, 100 million is 20 and 4 years, 100 million is 25. So that's the gap you're talking about there. It's not an insignificant amount of money.
So Dwayne Baker on the Sack Chat is kind of riding for Keegan Murray, saying Keegan has to stand in the corner a lot. And look, we've seen flashes from Keegan. We saw them in Minnesota before they got Zach LaVine. But are we sure? Because the conversation is, well, a lot of these dudes are cooking on bad teams. Are we sure that if Keegan was on one of these, let's just say the Pelicans, because we've been doing a big Trey conversation, right? Let's just say the Pelicans. If Keegan was on the Pelicans, do we think that he'd have crazy numbers? And I'm saying we, the collective we. 916-339-1140. Is Keegan, I guess the other way of asking this is Keegan being held back? Because how can he be getting held back but then he also needs help. That's what I get confused about with Keegan.
Well, offensively, I feel like he's being put in the Cam Johnson role. I'm talking about Cam Johnson on the Suns, not Cam Johnson on the Brooklyn Nets.
Mm-hmm.
He's being put in the role of, all we're asking you to do is play excellent defense and be the fifth scoring option or fourth scoring option some nights. I think in that respect, and Cam Johnson got paid eventually because he was so valuable to what Phoenix was doing, and then they traded him to Brooklyn. He got traded to Brooklyn, and then Brooklyn paid him in a way Phoenix was prepared not to do. So that's kind of what they're asking him to be right now, but that doesn't mean that role isn't going to change as the quote-unquote interim beam team maybe starts to change their identity a little bit as they get more comfortable with each other.
Yeah, it reminds me a little bit of high school. And you go to a private high school. This is the one thing, because I went to a private high school. I went to De La Salle. And, if you go to a certain high school, it doesn't necessarily have to be private, but there are some high schools that are better than others, that have tougher curriculums than others. And we knew this because my GPA and my SAT score didn't exactly match up. I should have had a better GPA based on my SAT score, but that also said that maybe I wasn't trying enough in school, but also that the teachers I had and the curriculum was a little tougher. So when it came time to apply to UCs and state schools, I thought that I'm not going to put myself on blast, but I thought that my GPA from being at a private school with a well-known curriculum would go further than a person with a better GPA with a lesser curriculum, right? Because my SAT scores were just as good as theirs or better. Turned out that all the state schools and the UCs cared about were numbers. They were very numbers driven. Now, private colleges looked at us a little bit differently, but a lot of schools out there simply look at the numbers. So when agents are trying to convince themselves or convince these teams to pay certain amounts, the organizations can say, well, these are the numbers. The context goes out the window. So Keegan Murray, we can sit here and say, well, if Allen was at X school, he'd have a better GPA, or if Keegan was on a bad team, he'd have a better scoring numbers. But if you don't have that, depending on the school you're applying to or the team you're trying to work with, they can say, maybe, maybe not. We don't know. This is what you get.
As a UC Davis alumni, let me say, you don't even have to take the SAT anymore. That's how much of a numbers game it is.
That's right. So you better come correct with your GPA. All right. Plenty of text coming through, calls as well, and Sack Chat. We got to get to a break. On the other side, continuing the conversation, what to make with Keegan Murray and the future of the young sharpshooter. We'll also have a conversation about Tristy Rodriguez's sit down with Malik Monk. Allen Stiles, Sactown Sports. Having a conversation about Keegan Murray. Also going to have a conversation about Malik Monk, who sat down with Tristy Rodriguez of NBC Sports California. Yeah, and I guess, Kyle, you were saying there is another level to this, and that level is the guys that are also in line to get paid this year and where Keegan fits in all that. And you have the Paolo Bancheros of the world, Chet Holmgren, Jalen Williams, both on the Thunder, which is crazy.
Yeah, and we're using the market of players who signed their rookie scale extensions in the last 2 years, which is fine. It's the data that we have. But I think the more interesting or the more telling data will be what some of these other players in his draft class signed for, which, in fairness, Keegan could be the first one to sign. So maybe he's the one to set the market. But it's interesting when you think of it that way, because there are about 8 or 9 forwards that are eligible to sign rookie scale extensions at various prices this offseason. So maybe Keegan will be the first one to sign. Maybe one of the other ones will, and that'll set the market a little bit.
So go ahead.
Yeah, you're looking at Jalen Williams, Chet Holmgren, and Paolo Banchero will probably all get maxes this offseason, I would guess. I don't know exactly what you do with Chet, but I assume Oklahoma City will sign Chet to a long-term extension, maybe with like the Zion deal with like injury guarantees or something. Then you've got, just to name a few, just forwards, Jabari Smith Jr., Nikola Jovic, Jeremy Sohan, Benedict Mathurin, Tari Eason. You could even throw Jaden Ivey in there. All those guys are eligible for extensions. And so if all of a sudden Jabari Smith Jr. is getting $150 million this offseason, does that change the market for what Keegan Murray is worth? Because if Jabari Smith is worth $30 million a year, does Keegan now get 25 a year? Does he get closer to 30 a year? It just depends on what these other players maybe signed for before Keegan.
So that is something that we will keep an eye on, and just trying to figure out, what exactly Keegan's value should be. From the 916, from Esteban, Allen, you sound as if Keegan will not grow as a player from here on out. Pretty sure he will get better and more consistent. I wouldn't say I'm worried about Keegan in that way. I'm just looking at it from a time perspective, and the extension is coming up this offseason. If there was another year, then number one, we wouldn't even be talking about it. But number two, we could sit there and say, hey, there's another year to see how Keegan will develop. So it's more about the way things are set up right now. How could we feel like Keegan is going to just bounce into another category based on that timeline? So the timeline to me is more of the question than the fact of the matter, whether or not I think Keegan will eventually get there, because that matters too, right? These guys, they come out of come into the league so early, and it's the weirdest situation where they have plenty of time and they're still young, but as other guys, you are directly measured against other guys in your class or in your age range. And if other dudes in your age range are taking leaps, albeit maybe not fair because of their situations, if you're on a bad team or something like that, that's who you're measured against. And Keegan, maybe he did himself a disservice with how well he played that first year, because everyone keeps bringing back up what he did that rookie year, and those expectations completely skyrocketed. We have to figure out where those expectations should eventually land. And I don't think anybody knows where they should land right now. Some people think that he should be taking the opportunity. Some people think that he's not being given the opportunity. Mike Brown tried to say, hey, he needs to take more initiative when he wants to get going. We don't really know what Doug Christie thinks about it. I haven't heard Doug Christie talk a lot about Keegan offensively. It's a lot just defensively in general. You bring in Zach LaVine, and I think the Kings' priority right now is getting Zach LaVine going, because they're trying to save face from this De'Aaron Fox thing. So if you look at the priority list, I don't even know how high Keegan offensively is on the priority list, which is something that the camp could throw back and say, so you put Keegan on the back burner, and now you don't want to pay him what he's worth. And the Kings could say, we tried to put him in a better situation, and he had opportunities and didn't take them. So I think it's going to be a level of finding the middle ground, as most things in life are, where it's, hey, Keegan probably could have took some more initiative, and hey, we should have got Keegan. We could have given Keegan more of the driver's seat to be that third option. Because, starting the season, I think the hope was, starting the season, Malik was on the bench. So you had De'Aaron, first option, Sabonis, second option, and I guess DeRozan slides into that third. But what were you supposed to do after Keegan's second season, where he had opportunities? If Keegan took last season by the you-know-whats, then we're not bringing in, and even bringing in DeMar DeRozan, his brother is 35.
Yeah, but DeMar DeRozan isn't part of the Kings' long-term future.
No.
Keegan Murray's more likely to have an increased role when DeMar DeRozan leaves. Now, does that mean the Kings are going to get better? That depends how much of an offensive leap Keegan Murray makes.
So I'm paying Keegan Murray more money because he's going to have to do more? Is that what you're saying?
That depends on what the vision of the organization is, which, by the way, depending on who's handing out the contract. It could be Monty McNair. It could be a new GM. We don't know. So all of that's at play when it comes to the Keegan contract, but the market itself is relatively straightforward. And I would imagine if this front office is the one who's doling out the extension this offseason.
And that's another great point. Might not even be them.
That's what it could be them. It could not be. There's a lot of factors at play, but if it is them, I would imagine Keegan Murray was the highest draft pick they've had in their tenure. Mm-hmm. He's delivered results about as well as you could ask for a number 4 pick in the draft. I mean, we'd like him to be better, sure. Mm-hmm. But if you look at the other players in his draft class, Jaden Ivey, I think they're fine with drafting Keegan over Jaden Ivey. Benedict Mathurin, I think they're fine drafting Keegan over him. Jeremy Sohan, I think they're happy they took Keegan there. So, like, all of that to say, this front office has invested so much in Keegan Murray, I would imagine they want to prioritize signing Keegan Murray long term. It's all going to be a negotiation, and we don't know who's going to be making those negotiations when the time comes.
On the other side, we get to the Malik Monk conversation. Still some text coming in on Keegan, so we still have some things to wrap up there. But we hear from Malik Monk and what he had to say about Trissie Rodriguez taking the keys of the franchise. Allen Stiles, Sactown Sports.
On the move, go.